And hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing Live show number 337. I am your host, Lauren Gray, and we are wrapping up January already, if you can believe it. We have one more show left, but more importantly, we have only one more week left of January before we roll into February. And it just seems like we took Christmas ornaments down, unless you consider that you're supposed to wait until, well, anyway. Um, but the idea is we're already 1 month into 2022, soon to be anyway. And so, from prognostication conversations at the beginning of the year to even more conversations of the reality where we are right now, this time of year, third week into January, we have lots of fun discussion today. Single topic, as always. Our topic today came out of a lot of email dialogues, and thank you all once again for your email comments about our show, the positive influences of it. Last week, we seemed to have struck a nerve on our conversation about leadership, which was fun. It was not as market-esque as most of our conversations usually are, but it did lend itself to the value proposition of what quality leadership and decision process could and should be. And I think the thing that resonated with some based on our distributions, all the platforms that were on, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, the Twitters, the LinkedIn, and so forth, plus also Twitch, plus also our TV channel, Hospitality Channel, and that's on Roku and Apple and Amazon and everything else, is we kind of threw a gauntlet down for a lot of organizations that are announcing their um, change in leaderships, their annual changing of passing of the guard kind of things, and the people that are being brought into councils and boards and leadership of associations and groups and so forth. And we laid down a challenge to them to be better than the industry right now, to lead the industry rather than be on the safe mode of conformity. But anyway, if you're interested in that conversation, our recording is always is available always, primarily on hospitalitychannel.tv. That's our main archive. We also have a secondary archive at hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com/live. But you can also replay it on YouTube and all the other channels as replays and all of our distributions on Facebook and what have you. But going back to today's topic, our topic, what is the really useful data? Data has turned into, in my perspective, a four-letter word. And I mean that in the context of how it's used in distorted ways. Uh, we are using it in several ways that I can't say that aren't right, but unfortunately, they're used in a lot of wrong ways. It's like a wonderfully handy tool that's not used for what it was intended for. Let me exaggerate on this a little bit. There's basically four uses for data in our environment. And please remember, all my context of conversation is related to hospitality. So all of my references are related to that context. There's basically four usages of data. One is to press my point. Well, the data shows. One is to go over and defend a point. Well, that's not what my data shows. The other is to validate value. The data shows revenue success of XYZ. And then the fourth is to identify an action. Well, the data says that we should do that. Four different contexts, same references, data. Like I said, it's a four-letter word. All too often, and you'll find this in most of your conversations. Actually, I challenge you in your conversations to press the point. When somebody says, well, my data, stop. What data? Who is it from? How broad is it? Is this statistically relevant? That's a tough number to be statistically relevant. Everybody can have an opinion, which is, quote, their data. It's like when people say, well, I've researched for vaccinations. No, you looked at a few friends on a social platform. That's not research. Research is in a laboratory with multiple variant testing, blah, 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 blah. So don't say you're researching. That you're looking things up, you're listening to people's opinion. That's valid, but you're not researching. Researching is a much more rigorous process. So when some people refer to my data shows, great. I will accept your point, data driven, because that's truly the strongest argument anybody can have as a conversation. If you can prove to me the validity of your data, that's a whole different conversation. You'll often find that most people in that dialogue that refers to it in that context weren't really, first, the creator of the data. Two, they don't know how the data was truly acquired or aggregated. And three, they took it at face value. And I say this because of an interesting statistic that 64% of the people on social media platforms, as an example of human behavior, will share content that they didn't fully read through before sharing it to somebody else. So it could say terrible things at the end or somewhere in the middle of it, but the person that's sharing it read enough or seen enough or thought of that they understood it enough that they wanted to forward to somebody. For what reason? what we always do for virility, make ourselves look good, validate our relationship with the person we're sending to by saying, look, I'm looking out for information you're interested in, or look, I found something that I think makes me look good because I found it and showed it to you. Whatever way you want to refer to the motivation to it, 64% of the people do that. Data is a lot like that, especially the higher up in the dialogues you go. And what I mean by higher up in the dialogues, the higher the responsibility levels, property level management, executive team management at the property level, then into corporate offices, corporate relationship, departmental heads, all the way up to C level, all the way up to ownerships. Because of that, you have to rely on the authenticity of the data that's being handed to you. So you have to trust that the person's handing you the data has vetted it at the level that they're knowledgeable about. So if they're going to be responsible to you and hand you data, it's because it's been proven. So when people at that level say, well, I have data that proves otherwise, great. What data is that? They should have been given the depth and the source of the data and the conclusiveness of it based on statistical relevance. English is not doing well for me today. Um, and there has to be a confidence factor. Not all data is perfect. There is always a margin of uncertainty. I mean, there are only certain things in the world that are certain. And so, for that reason, data, when you're aggregating a mass amounts of data, is subject to its causation of relationships. This data being pulled is situational. It could also be very fluid. As we used to say when we went to economics class in college, I hated the class, but later learned to love the premise of it. In economics class, they say if all things are constant, we're going to look at this one variable. Well, the reality is not all things are constant. So it's hard to look at just one variable when everything that's being compared against is not static. Now, that leads it to data acquisition and the types of data acquisition. And let me explain this. There's two types of data that you can work with: live, progressive, interactive data, static, forensic data. Now, we're going to use those two relevant points later in our discussion, but those two distinctions of current relevant data versus static forensic data have value to each and have negatives to each. So let's go back to my point. Four uses of data: pressing a point, defending a point, validating a point, or identifying an action. So, with all of this, when the conversation of the four-letter word data comes up, you really need to understand what data is valuable, which is really the context of our conversation today. What is the really useful data? I have been doing what I do for a very long time, more years than probably I want to admit to, really, in strange ways. And I've worked up through the ranks of many different positions and been in many different positions in which I was trying to be responsible for the title that I had. Through that process, I learned the goods and the bads of who I reported to and who reported to me. From that, I began to ask more relevant questions and also hid answers to people in certain ways because it was not relevant to what the point I was trying to make. I have been as much of a victim of exploiting the usage of the term data as anybody else. So I'm not calling the kettle black on this one. It is, I'm from the frying pan to the fire just as bad as everybody else, to now a new way that I handle data. So let's take three perspectives of the usage of data. The first perspective is going to be operations. And again, everything we talk about is in relation to hospitality. The second reference point of data will be revenue management. The third perspective, you're dear to my heart, marketing. So these three perspectives, there are other perspectives: ownerships, accounting, HR, lots of different perspectives as to the value proposition of data. But we're going to take just these three because they're intertwined in a more inclusive way for how data gets used. We're going to first take on operations. Knowing that there's four usages of data: pressing a point, defending a point, validating value, or identifying an action. Operations has certain data points that it relies upon based on the strata of the responsibility of the person using it. And I'd like to take an example. First off, cash flow is the king. All said and done, you need money to pay bills. So either it's coming from your actual cash flow of operations, or it's coming from the mothership, what you collectively send your money to, in their allocation of funding to pay your bills. If you have ever been in a role of operations at a property level, it's not about how much money you're making in the sense of whether there's money in your bank account. It's how much money you're allocated from your operational entity, whether it be a management group, ownership group, brand, whatever that you're working for, as to what they are willing to put funds into the account that you use to pay your bills. So a lot of the discussions that operations has, and people may not be aware of this below this level of operations, is that a lot of dialogue on the exec committee of the property in relationship to its management group or ownership group is about what gets funded and what gets paid. Now, the perspective upwards is about balancing that flow with the other properties. One property isn't generating as much as another property, but all the funds come into a single area. How is that allocated? And it gets prioritized. That's where the word amortization comes through. That's where the words of hello. Again, English language is amazing. When you roll over an amount from one month of payment to the next payment, accrual. Guys, man, I'm having a hard time with English today. So that's where all these processes come in. When you accrue something, you know you're either going to have to be paying for it, or you have the money available, but you're rolling it to another cost factor. So accruals mean that it didn't happen in this month, but this is when we paid it, or we paid it in this month and this is when it happens. Either which way, you're accruing the value between one place to another. So these are the conditions and concerns of operations use of data. They need to understand what those numbers mean really about cash flow. But now we get into certain terms that are very operation specific. And this is where a lot of people get muddled. Even people that are in the operations and at the level that they need to be responsible for this, they don't often understand the variations of some of the data that they have. Excuse me while I drink coffee. Let me refer to a baseline that is defiantly used all the time. EBITDA. Now, technically, there's lots of variations to this statement, but the two that get most confused is EBITDA, EBITA, which is an acronym, which we'll get to, and EBITDA, which is EBITDA. Now, the first is for more property specific operations as a measuring stick. The second is more about ownership and capitalization and investment perspective. So one gets used by one entity of operations much more so than the other. Let's go through the acronyms. EBITDA, EBITA, is a short for earnings before taxes and amortization. It is a formula that calculates the operational profitability of a company by including the cost of the equipment and excluding the financial costs. That's the big thing, excluding the financial costs. You're not worried about your loan debt. You're not worried about the financial impact on your operational expenses. Okay. You hit this line of EBITDA, okay, EBITA, and that is really an operations property level benchmark. How are we operating for all the things that we have to spend to do the business that we're doing? Now, EBITDA, EBITADA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and it margins reflects a firm's short-term operational efficiency. EBITDA is useful when comparing companies with different capital investment, debt, and tax profiles. This is an expanded view of other debt structures that are affecting that business's operational fluidity and margin. It adds in the fact that you're in a state that has different taxes. It adds in the fact that you have a capital investment percentage margin that you have to include in your cost operation expenses. Anybody that's had to bring a P&L or budget discussion to a higher entity, management or ownership, has to explain the request of capital improvement. Often it's not in their control as to how much that happens. They can talk to that entity about what they would like to see, new air conditioners and or this and capital expenses. But it's up to the operating entity to decide if it is allocated into that budget for that year and hence added into the EBITDA of that property's calculations over the course of that fiscal year. So you have EBITDA, EBITA, and you have EBITDA, EBITDA. That's just certain data references that are benchmarks within the operations. But the key element I want to keep in our conversation is really truly cash flow. I just want to give those two examples as examples of not everybody understands the same bench or the same finish line because they're two different finish lines. So let's get into revenue management and the data that's used within revenue management. And this goes back to our earlier discussion about the two types of data that you can refer to. You can refer to active data that is paced to what it currently is. And then you have forensic data that I refer to, which is historical data. Now, revenue management uses both, but relies more on the forensic data than they do the current data. And I'll explain a little bit of that based on my firsthand historical experience working with all entities and being responsible as a revenue manager and corporate revenue manager and all the things I used to do in revenue management. It's not a blind spot for me at all. But let's go through the core, more forensic things. And that is ADR, average daily rate, which is out of all the rooms you sold that day or plan on selling that day, what is the average rate when you add all those together and divide it by the number? Okay. LOS is length of stay. Length of stay is literally by those reservations you have. What is the duration of that reservation? And that number, the average length of stay, LOS, okay, is a calculated value, which we'll get to. Then you have occupancy. How many of the inventories that we can sell are occupied? Those three numbers are related to every day and every month in the math that revenue managers use. Those are the holy trinity of information that is often used in what revenue management does. And what revenue management does is use those numbers to baseline benchmark what their perception of what they should do on what rates to ask for, how much inventory to make available at those rates, and what the value proposition of the conversion of those purchases are based on the length of stay, whether we're encouraging length of stay, discouraging length of stay, fencing, okay, gates, as they refer to them, as to what you are requiring for people to make reservations, like you can't book on Friday, but you can stay through Friday if you book on Thursday. You have to be out by Sunday if you book on Saturday. Those are fences, okay, that are used in the containment operation of a revenue management, how they control basically two levers. How much are we asking for the people to spend, and how much inventory are we allowing that to be spent at? There are other nuances, but those are the two big levers. So now let's talk a little bit about, well, that's one more forensic one, year over year. And this is your current performance, your current ADR, current length of stay, current occupancies, in comparison to the same time frame last year. So January to January, January of 2021 to January of 2022. That is a year over year, YOY, okay, that you look at, which is much more accurate in value proposition than December looking at January. Unfortunately, a lot of people do that. They're like, well, what's our current period based with the previous period? And they want to know why the numbers are always going down. And it is a frustrating argument to talk to people of saying you can't always progress. We'd love to think that we always progress. Every time frame grows against the previous time frame, but we have business cycle, and as we've seen with the pandemic and other things, we have a huge fluctuation as to the demand and the availability of that demand to actually get to our market that does not validate the period to period conversation. That data is an interesting number to look at, but it's not as an actual number as it is really much same time frame to same time frame. How did we do the same time last year? We know there's different influences, that's given, but how are we in comparison? Are we growing, or have we lost a lot in comparison? Because our budgets are based on this static development of data. Okay. The last one I want to talk about in revenue management, and there are many, but this is the one that I think is valuable for our conversation, is pace. Pace is a not forensic, but more of a tangible in current time frame. Pace is calculated lots of ways. You could take a time block, the pace of this time compared to what we were last year. Okay, year over year pace. How was our pickup of reservations? Were we at, below, or ahead of where we were this time for the dates ahead of us? Okay. That pace report is helpful to know whether or not we're missing some of our targeting. Did we lose segments like corporate travel, guys? Okay. And so our pace is off. Did any other segment replace that pace? And if so, what is that pace? Pace is a really wonderful measuring of data to determine how well your efforts are reflecting in the current bookings of your hotel. Okay. That's a very valuable tool that revenue management uses. That is a huge crossover in discussions we're going to have. So let's jump over to marketing. Marketing has a whole Pandora's box of reporting. I want to talk about the useless ones first. And I want to talk about ROAS, return on ad spend, ROAS. ROAS is a feel good number. It's not an irrelevant number, it's a feel good number. ROAS is important to marketers because it validates our strategies as being productive. Return on ad spend. I spent X dollars, I got Y in return. My return on ad spend, my ROAS, is X compared to Y. Okay. Which goes to the ROI discussion we're going to expand on a little bit. So that's helpful until you realize it has no real help for the true KPIs, key performance indicators, that are needed to talk to revenue management and operations. So let's go back a little bit. Operations, I said that one of the most paramount feature numbers to look at for data is cash flow. How much money are we bringing in and contributing to our overall expense to generate business that cash flow represents? There's different baselines that it gets measured up to. We talk about EBITDA and EBITDA, but in all honesty, cash flow is a key element in the operation discussion. In revenue management, we're talking about pace, our progression of business, our sources of business, how that equates to measurements like daily rate and length of stay and a number of rooms that we've sold for all the inventory we have available to sell. Because remember, we're selling a perishable product. We can't resell a room that we lost last night this night because that day's passed. We can only sell forward on perishable product. So having a ROAS, let's say of 20 to 1, I spent a dollar and made $20. That's great. Unfortunately, $20 doesn't help revenue management as much as 20,000 would, and it doesn't help operations cash flow as much as 20,000 would. So the KPI, the key performance indicator, isn't a ROAS of the amount of return I had. As valuable as it is to measure the success of campaign performance, which is the value of ROAS, okay, it isn't truly a key performance indicator that helps in your dialogue with the other departments of operation and revenue management. So I'm going back to the conversation, which is our topic, what is really useful data. The KPI, that common vernacular of key performance indicator, what is accepted by all the departments to measure how well everybody's doing, has to be mutually valuable to each of the departments. Total revenue generate top line revenue. When we say top line, means money coming in before it gets allocated, how much where it covers costs and where it took to generate it. Just this is the money we're banking, okay, and then everything but underneath of that until we get to net, okay, or EBITDA, is pretty much how we have to allocate that money's use in the process. How much to cover labor, how much to cover the product, the overhead expenses, the fixed expenses, and everything else. That is below top line revenue. So a KPI that is usable by everybody, because marketing has no interest. I wouldn't say no interest. It has no real in dialogue about below top line revenue. Cost factors of generating the revenue, absolutely. But the cost of housekeeping or the cost of electricity or the cost of labor or whatever it is not a marketing program that they work with. They certainly should be aware of what it costs to run the business they're doing, so they have to understand what a good, successful ROI would mean. But beyond that, it's not a metric that they have to understand, as well as they have to understand, tell me what I'm going and fetching and doing. Tell me how much money we need to make. So that my KPI means as I do things in marketing that generate top line revenue, I know how well I'm going towards the measurement that everybody values. Revenue management, same thing. Total gross revenue that they calculate based on anticipated occupancy, anticipated ADR that they're going to be asking for it, anticipated length of stay that calculates the value of a transaction. That means that they can say these segments we're going to be producing this much money at these rates for these length of stays for these times, and we can calculate what that revenue would anticipate it to be. That revenue gets measured against marketing success in attaining it for what they impact. And operations can then use those numbers to determine their projected cash flow to know whether or not that they're in trouble or good when it comes to the cost of generating that revenue. See how that single KPI, that common vernacular of data, is a critical component to the measuring of everybody's activity towards it. That's a key element. Other things about marketing are all related to marketing as to the progress of how well their programs and efforts work. And now let's go to one of the banes of all discussion, and that is ROI, return on investment. It is valuable when it is useful and useless and prohibitive when it is being used against the purpose of its value. And I know that sounds like a double speak. Everyone tries to discuss ROI on every initiative. Great. How much am I going to spend and how much am I going to make from it? It is one of the quintessential three questions that get asked in every conversation I've been at C-level. And for those just may not be familiar with my three questions that always get asked, it always gets asked when anything's presented at the C level being, executive level, chairman of the board, and marketing person, all the people that are at the C level, um, is how much am I going to spend? How much am I going to make for what I spend? And of course, the bane of other questions is who else is doing it, which we've had discussions on the live show before. So asking how much to spend, how much you're going to make it is literally asking what's the ROI. Just put those two questions together and say what's the ROI, and they do. They often say that. ROI is great for anticipating. Remember the four uses of data: pressing a point, defending a point, validating a value, or identifying an action. It is great for pressing a point. Oh, I can get you a 10 to 20 to 1 ROI. I can also defend a point. Well, I know it wasn't much money, but we got 10 to 1 on the return there. Okay. And validating a value. Okay. You gave me $1,000 and we got $10,000 back. That valid, that's validating. And identifying an action. Wow. We went over and spent $1,000. We got $10,000. We should look at expanding. Is there more money to spend there because there's more money to make there? See how the same data point can be used from the four perspectives for totally different reasons. ROI is the killer of great ideas because ROI does not answer to all the reasons why you do marketing, all the reasons why you calculate revenue management the way you do. But primarily marketing, ROI is a killer because there are things in marketing that you have to do that do not have a direct ROI calculation capability. Let's take social as a prime example of that. Social is an amplifier. We've had this discussion on the live show many times. Social amplifies your efforts of conversion to other channels. By being in social and being in storylines and content and context and engagement, people become familiar with who we are and what we are, and they then go to our website and or other channels that we are converting people from, and they buy our product from there, our rooms, our restaurant, whatever. But if you look at the money we spent to do that on social, the ROI is terrible. It's not a strong direct channel. What we mean by direct channel is people book from it. If anybody's never explained what direct channel is that channel from an attribution point from that place, Facebook as an example, Instagram as an example, whatever, over to the acquisition of a product. They bought a room from the link we put on that platform. That direct channel, okay, is not strong with social compared to its other counterparts. But if you look at the attribution string, and we've had that conversation on a live show this past year, the past 3 months actually, about what attribution string modeling looks like, it is very much present in almost every serious valued attribution string. It contributes almost each and every time in the process of people's discovery and purchase of your product. But if you were to compare it on just the ROI value, it doesn't shine well. And so you're always struggling convincing the people that write checks, C-level or management team or exec level or whatever it is, to keep putting money towards something that they can't walk around and say, well, we got a 10 to 1 ROI on that, because it doesn't translate that way. But if you took it away, you would wonder why your value on other channels went down, because we lost the impact of the amplification that social gave. And that's just an example of how ROI is used to a negative sense. Using it against its value relationship, as I mentioned in that circular explanation, is the bane of ROI, because not everything shines well through an ROI, even though everything about what you're doing is a value to building business and making sales. So ROI, useful in certain places, the kiss of death for many others. So let's go back to some higher value conversations that we had. Common vernacular is going to be a constant. When I was doing the Rocket series with HSMI, we went to 33 cities. Had an absolutely wonderful time with Bonnie Buckheiser, Jane Thiessen, Fran Brasso. When we were running around for that, it was great. We had this convergence discussion going on for 3 years, long before anybody said, "Hey, maybe we should work together." We were there 3 years ahead doing that. I'm not trying to beat a drum, but we had mentioned constantly this common vernacular discussion. We should be talking about numbers that make sense to all of us, not just to one of us. And my example I consistently give is the one I just gave you today, ROAS. ROAS for marketing is only valuable to marketing. It has no value proposition to revenue management and or operations cash flow discussions, because it doesn't translate to the value of contribution that it really should. It only validates the value of the market strategy, and that's the only value it truly represents. KPIs that are common vernacular, like gross revenue, top line gross revenue, or things like that, channel contribution percentages, channel shift to cost displacement analysis, those things are higher value because they're common KPIs that everyone in revenue management operations can understand. Okay. And actually, let me take that last example and expand it just a little bit. Channel shift, okay, is as valuable as channel contribution overall. OTAs. When an OTA sells your product, there is costs associated with it several places. The channel itself, it could be 15, 18, 22, 25% commissions based with that. And of course, if you were spending to amplify your presence on that platform, you're spending not only for them to sell your product more, you're paying them more to sell your product. So if you can take some of that channel to OTAs as a contribution, OTAs driving you business, commission based business, which is not in your P&L budget, which makes it an open end. Sure, if they keep wanting to feed us business, we're only paying on the business we're getting. Yeah, but you're paying commissions. And yes, you are paying for their advertising, whether you think directly or not. If you can shift that over to your own meta search program, where now it's coming to your direct web channel, your direct booking engine, which has a lower cost of transaction than your OTA, but you're paying on top of your your channel, then you not only made money by the reduction of cost, but you've improved the CRM value, maybe being able to communicate directly with them in future tense, creating them a lifelong value proposition. You can use it to resell, upsell, post sell over time. You've created a higher value for the data they collected because they engaged with you directly. You can offer value incentives. There's a whole value proposition about bringing them over directly. Well, when you calculate those numbers for operations to understand it, they understand that revenue is still coming in top line, but the cost factor of that revenue has gotten cleaner. You're not spending as much money to get that top line revenue. So operations understands it that way. Revenue management understands it that again, they saved the channel value, but they still get to keep their total revenue numbers high or at the numbers that they were forecasting for. Just channel shifted it over. They understand the cost savings of the channel, but they are not responsible for that in as much as um, knowing where the revenues come from based on the rates that they're offering. So marketing gets the benefit of having made that channel shift because now the cost savings were there. The ability to use that data for resell and communications and collaboration and developing a lifelong relationship is much higher. So that channel shift calculation is a common KPI. That understanding of all the departments that are touching it, that's a valuable proposition. Then you can even talk about accounting. They understand the difference of writing a big check that they have to send over to an OTA versus the fact they don't have to. They understand that. So there you go, common vernacular. Um, Going back to a little bit of the ROAS discussion and so forth, cutting out a lot of the vanity metrics. ROAS is a vanity metric outside of the marketing discussion. If a marketing team is sitting together, ROAS is a discussion of a measurable metric of performance of campaign. It is determining whether that campaign's messaging, platform use, budget, cost of everything is relevant because of its ROAS. It is a measuring tool within the department to determine whether or not we're basically hunting in fertile grounds. Okay. Outside of the marketing department, it should not be used in context. It's not meant to be defensive. Hey, we got a 21 ROAS on this. Don't be picking on us, even though we only contributed $1,000. It's not a point of defense. Don't use data as a point of defense. Okay. Um, Real value metrics really are the common vernacular, like KPIs, the defined KPIs, key performance indicators. What is the goals that all of us agree we need to be hitting? And is it a total gross revenue? Is it an operational margin? Because those are two strong influences on the strategies. If you're looking for top gross line revenue at all costs, just give me top flow revenue. You'll undersell. You'll always have lower rates. You're driving occupancy basically at the expense of ADR. You're showing revenue, but it's costing you a lot more to generate it. Your margin has diminished. Now, if you're looking for marginable business, you increase your ADR, which inherently lowers your occupancy, but your margin of operational costs go down because you're less taxing on your product. So there's levers, and that's operational discussions. That's what operations deals with is, hey guys, we really got to cut down labor costs. We don't have labor. Okay. So we have to cut down what we're doing. So we're going to raise our rates because we don't want to sell all the rooms because we don't have the staff to manage the rooms. So we have to sell a limited inventory, which means a higher hopeful ADR rate if we can get it, because then we're less taxing on the property, less taxing on our cost factors. That's a strategy compared to guys, pull out the stops. I don't care what you sell as long as you're selling. I want everything, and I don't want a room empty. Now you're just talking about getting people in the door, heads in beds. And that can mean free for all. Like, oh, we're going to short sell this and we're going to undercut that and we're going to do it below our comp set and we're just going to throw rates out there and people are going to buy us up. We're going to fill this hotel, but it's low rate business. And it's taxing on the property. It ends up costing you in the long run because of wear and tear, so forth and so on. Labor costs have to go up in order to compensate for the servicing, on and on and on. So see how they're intertwined. Marketing has its marching orders. Revenue management has its mission. Operations has its purpose. All of those things work in collaboration when the proper conversation is happening between all of them. So common vernacular, quality value metrics, reduction of value vanity metrics. Now, I want to bring one last conversation to this, and that is reports versus analytics. We are inundated, buried with reports, and it's a safety net for us. Well, I'm getting a report on that. Oftentimes, the report's never really looked at past certain things, if at all. It's often shelved simply to be that if it's ever asked for, it's there, but it's not being used. It's not being analyzed. A report is just that. Here's information. Analytics is what comes from looking at a report. There is such a huge gap. There is some really cool tools out there that give you a tremendous amount of reports that don't get looked at. And I say that sincerely and purpose. I am constantly betting with my clients the validation of some of the reports that they deal with by, I wouldn't say embarrassing them, but basically calling them out. Where is that on the report? What information on the report are you referring to? Why are you asking that particular question when the numbers don't show that? And even if they do show that, they don't have a working knowledge of it. Now, I'm not saying that of my clients. I'm saying that in general of all the people I've worked with over the time. There is so many reports that don't get used. And let me bring some of a straightforward example. I defy you to tell me that if you're a recipient of a star report, no matter what your role is in the hotel, and I'm probably referring more to the old static send reports that go out there, PDFs, but even still, the new reports electronically, same methodology, just different references. But the old static reports that went out, tell me you didn't go to tab 4. Just, what are you looking for? You're looking at RevPAR to market. You're looking at ADR to market. You're looking at occupancy to market. You're looking at year over year, and you're looking at time segment. That's it. Then the rest falls underneath of that. But primarily, and what are you doing it for? You're looking at whether you have to explain, defend, or look for accolades. Or look how rocking I am. Look at how cool we are. Okay. You're either looking at, oh, geez, that number's not good. I'm gonna have to explain that one. Now you know what to walk in the meeting ready to talk about because that number is not a good number. Or you're walking into the meeting beating your chest like Tarzan. That look at this number. Look how cool that is. The rest of the report is hardly really looked at. Now I say that in generalities. Revenue management should tear that apart. But let's look at that report. The STAR report is a forensic report. Even though it's from last week, it's still last week. This year over last year, this month over last month. It's a forensic report. There are reports that marketers have that could be much more helpful to revenue management. That are things like data studios with Google that took at the metrics associated with website traffic, the trending of discovery. And we've had long discussions. I used to, again, going back to the rocket conversations you used to travel the country with, are references to how marketing has a lot more information way ahead of the key elements of data that revenue management uses, which is basically prime booking window, date of arrival, duration of stay, date of departure. Those numbers revenue management use as literally in stone stuff. Marketer use it as a conclusion to an information source that they've had long time ahead of that, which is discovery, education, and then conversion. And that tail is much larger, much longer, and there's a lot more people involved with it as it kept progressing down to the small amount of people that actually converted. Okay, that information should be shared with revenue management. Where did they come from? When did they start looking from where they came from? What were they looking at when they came and looked at us? Was it rates? Was it room types? Was it event driven? Was it business cycle demand? That was the time of year, spring break, summer, whatever it is. That information should be collaborated with revenue management. So revenue management knows how to translate their metrics of ADR based on demand. ADR is a demand function. I can't ask for $500 rooms if everybody, number one, is only willing to pay 100 and everybody else in the market is only asking for 100, unless I am so stellarly large. But if my comp set, and these are data points that a lot of people don't understand and discuss, you have comp sets that are built upon aspirationally what you want. I'll probably get critical about this. A lot of people develop comp sets, especially in Smith travel reports, star reports, and stuff like this, which are financially based, meaning we want to show our investors and our ownership group or something always good numbers. So we're going to compare ourselves to marginally non-competitive hotels that we should dominate basically based on the product that we have available to market. So we always look good. So ownership feels good about their investment. There is honest to goodness star reports built purposely for that. Then you have other star reports which are much more realistic, saying who exactly in market are we competing with? And then you have the aspect of where in our competition do we strategically want to be? Do we want to be the leader in our comp set? We're the ones that always demand the lion's share of occupancy. Do we have the inventory to do that? A small little boutique hotel where their inventory is small in comparison to who they're competing themselves to, who feel like they're direct competing with in market, can't be the product leader in all things. They can be the ADR leader because they have fewer inventory and can command a higher rate. They may be the ADR leader, but when it comes to occupancy, they're fifth out of five. And you always try to put yourself in sets of five pretty much. And this is the strata of having a mid-scale market, upper scale market, luxury, upper scale luxury. There's all these tiers, 9 tiers, basic. More if you talk to different people, different organizations as to how they fractionalize that. But pretty much you have low, medium, high, and 3 tiers in each one. So from this, you determine where you rank, and that is your strategy. Do you watch other people's rates? And as soon as your person that you know you go head to head with in the market drops rate, you always drop it $1 less? Or are you the one that says we're always going to be $1 more? Or do you say, I set my rates and people look at your rates and react to you? And these are all the dynamics that revenue managers work with in their constant daily strategy of how they perform. Are they the market leader in ADR or occupancy? And the other components, RevPAR, okay, which is a whole nother strategy of balancing the two so that you always maintain your presence. Market share is a strategy. Market share is out of the inventory that I have available representing my contribution to my market, what is my fair market share? And anything below 100%, somebody's stealing your business. Anything over 100%, you're stealing their business. This is daily revenue management discussion and strategy. That strategy from revenue management should be with marketing as well. What is it we're trying to do? I want more than our fair share of market. Everyone wants more for market fair share, but to do that, you have to give up one or the other. Either I give up my ADR marginally to get the occupancy at a more comparable ADR so I can keep my RevPAR up, or I give up occupancy and push on the ADR, but that marginal variation between the two also still keeps my RevPAR up. It's a fine finesse of math. That's why you revenue managers are very mathematically inclined, because these awarenesses. Problem is, if you're looking at forensic only, you're kind of like driving a car through the rearview mirror. Even though you're going over familiar terrain, there's always some variations that come up. People walking across the street, a light that's not green when it should, or is red when it should have been green when you're there. These things can create incidences that you weren't prepared for because you're constantly looking at historical data. Historical data is rear view mirrors. Marketing can give you the forward vision to say, hey, look, I know where we've been, got that data, we're good, let's keep using it. But let's ask marketing what is coming up? Who's looking for us now? What interest do people have coming up in the future that we should exploit for what we're offering that I have control over, which is ADR and inventory availability and package deals and all the other stuff that revenue management has as tools. That collaborative conversation is incredibly valuable when it comes up to what to do next. Um, Marketing has great tools to do that. There's so much data that marketing can use to help with revenue management. One of the best examples I give them is your website gives a fount of information as to what people are looking for. You can track, just as an example, when people put dates into your website for what they're looking for with you. They found your hotel, variety of reasons that marketing is doing. They come to your website and they put in dates to see what the rates and inventory type are if they're available for those times. Everything about what I just said is data that you can use. One, you know the geographic location of the person when they come to your website. Two, you know the date that they're doing that. Like what's the day that they actually came to your website? Three, you know from them putting the data into those fields, you can track that information to know what dates they were interested in. That is liquid gold to a revenue manager because they're literally saying, where are they coming from? When ahead of it are they actually looking and what are they looking for? You put that data into like a Tableau or an our platform or any platform that handles statistical data. And now you can create wonderful engagements that said, well, let's look at lead time for certain dates going forward. And we created this in Tableau where you literally can go look, and it creates a nice little map and shows heat maps on a map that says, okay, people in from Boston were looking for those dates you're interested in. Like, so let's see, what kind of business can we expect, hopefully, or what people are interested in coming to us fourth week of March. And so we look at that data from the data I just described to you and say, wow, here's all these geographic locations. Boston is about 109 days out. Philadelphia is about 87 days out. Chicago is 90 days out. Okay, for that, there's people that are looking for those, and there's a lot of people in Boston compared to Philadelphia, and not as much in Chicago. So Boston seems to have to be the most interesting coming during those dates. First question for marketing is, why would they be? That's fine. Marketing handles that. Revenue management is like, okay, so if I know that there's this possibility, let me go look at my historical data and see what is the rates based on geography. What is the rates that people are willing to pay? Philadelphia was willing to pay 150 a night. I'm wanting to get 170 a night. Hmm. Philadelphia, however, was historically willing to pay 165. Historically, people from Philadelphia for that time paid that rate to be there. So Philadelphia, although smaller in volume, where is closer to what I'm looking for rates. So it's probably likely that we're going to get better conversions going to Philadelphia, okay, than we are going to Boston. Even though there might be more interest in Boston, we can wait later and see if they're going to just realize they got to pay the rate and leave it at that. Or so we then go and look at Philadelphia and say, okay, well, they're looking to come to their 101 days out. Let's plan marketing, guys, that we target Philadelphia starting 100 days out, okay, going forward with this rate, offering them the chance to come to our product. We're targeting the marketing to Philadelphia. What does that do? It cuts our cost rather than broadcasting marketing everywhere, not knowing where all the demand's from, to the markets that are most interested in coming to us based on the fact that the traffic validates that to the website. And we're offering them a rate that they're likely to take on because we're talking to revenue management and telling us the rate resistance that that marketing may have had historically, so we're not asking too much of an ask from that market to spend the rate that we're now asking them for. And then as we progress into the other lead times of the other property of the other geographic locations, we can incentivize them based on our success of our previous campaigns, whether we still need more market share. Compression, which is a revenue management function. How much compression are we getting in our market? The more compression you have, the better you can ask the rate because there's less availability for people to select from. They're having to succumb to the fact that they have to pay a higher rate to get the room. This is the strategy combination communication between revenue management and marketing. It's the value proposition that aggregated, consistent, similar KPIs, common vernacular, key performance indicators, create this kind of scenario. This data is available to everyone right now. Say versus brand, because brand controls the website. They're not going to give you this information. So you're going to have to rely upon other indicators. And that's a whole nother discussion. And the reason why you hire people like me to go over and do that and help you understand how to make that work better for you. So recap of some of other stuff before we drop into a news discussion. Okay. Um, what is the really useful data? Okay, there's four usages of data. There's pressing your point, there's defending your point, there's validating the value of what you're doing, and identifying an action from what has been created. Those are the four aspects of data usage. There are three perspectives we discussed today: operations, with their key element being related to cash flow; revenue management, with their key performance indicators related to forensic data, which is historical data of ADR, length of stay, and occupancies, and year over year performance; and more current data relationships like PACE reports. We talked about marketing, the fact that ROAS is an internal departmental metric that shouldn't be used in this conversation with other departments because it has a lack of relevancy. A need to define KPIs, key performance indicators, that are common understanding for all departments and a shared goal for all departments. The diminishment of the use of the word ROI because it is an overused term that can't always define the value of a strategy because it doesn't fill the definition of what ROI represents as a numeric. There's a need for common vernacular, that everyone needs to understand the same language being used by everyone so we all understand what each person is trying to do and our contribution to that. The diminishment of use of feel-good vanity metrics, things like ROAS is the best example I can give, or people that saw your social post. Yay, did they share it? Did they comment on it? That has higher value metrics, which is for social as an example. The discussion of real value metrics, going to deciding of top line revenue strategy or versus the ability to yield the revenue for the cost of operation, which is a difference between just selling anything you have versus selling it at a rate that keeps the margin of profitability higher for your EBITDA and EBITDA calculations, which is operations discussions. Then you have things reports versus analytics. Reports is just data that gets put onto a shelf a lot of times. Analytics is the usage of that data to make the decisions related to future actions and understanding of current actions. Again, going back to our four usages of data, that validates value and also identifies future action. I try to shy away from data reflections as being a defense of a point because unless you're having to define why you're proposing something, aka you're pressing a point, defending it with the usage of data is argumentative. It's not that it doesn't have value. I'm not saying always be nice and smile and concede. It's about defending with data is usually a pretty big club that you're beating somebody over the head with because you're basically trying to discount their authenticity of their project by overwhelming them with evidence to the contrary. And that is not a good team conversation to have. So I try to always think we can shy away from the usages of data, the four-letter word, as defendable, and say, well, I'm going to pound you into the ground with this big club because I'm overwhelming you with information that you can't counter with your own big club. So those are that. When it comes to talking about data, when people throw that four-letter word around, I would like to remind people get past that actual words being used and listen for the why. Why are they referring to the four-letter word of data? Again, knowing that there's four primary usages for it, why are they using that term? Is it because they're trying to press their agenda or are they trying to understand yours? Keeping that listening as to the why that usage of the word data in their dialogue is being used is a critical component to knowing to get to the answer that's most beneficial. And when you're reviewing the data with someone, don't use it as a defending point. Well, we were right about that. And boy, we said that we saw that coming and this and this and this. Don't beat your chest. Instead, always look to data critically as to we thought at this, it wasn't as strong as we thought. This is a surprise to us. We didn't expect this to be a result the way it was. That vulnerability shows your willingness to listen, and more importantly, the value that you're willing to share from what you're doing compared to claiming it as yours and trying to garner the success value of that and getting a little attaboy and all that kind of stuff and segment yourself from other departments that didn't have the benefit of the data you're purporting, that didn't have the insight that you were given from the data. And now it's they got to do that one-upsmanship with you. It's that politics and that internal discussion of how data is used as a weapon a lot of times. So when reviewing data, always look for the actionable. What can we do with what we now know? That's a positive for the four-letter word, not a negative of, well, our data shows completely different. All the other ways the data gets used as a, let me beat you down until you quit asking or saying something that you're not agreeing with me on. Bad usage of data. So there you have it. Very quickly, let's hit some of the news items. I wanted to talk about one article that came out of Hospitality Net, actually two, to be honest with you. The first one out of Hospitality Net came out, the progress in travel we can't ignore. I'm not calling BS on this one. I'm calling it as, sure, I can always put lipstick on a pig because in all honesty, we are better than we were this same time last year in 2021 compared to 2022. Because if you look at the time capsule of 2021, we still had the impact of January 6th, which shook the world. Whether you believe it or not, it shook the impact and the perception of things and the transition of political power in our country and so forth. And also, too, we were just getting into some sort of vaccination cycle, and we're already getting the resistance of people that were too dumb to know that they should get vaccinated and so forth. I say that critically, but there are some people that have legitimate medical reasons, but there are very few in comparison to those that haven't. So we were in a transitional period at that time. So obviously, anything can look better than that. That's kind of an argument we always have about the data we're using. 2019 is always going to look better than 2022. It's 2020. Don't look at 2020 or 2021 in comparison to 2020 and say, look at me, how great I am, because you're comparing yourself to almost zero. You're always going to be better than zero. So because of that, it's an unfair comparison. I say the same of this article. It's unfair to compare us to 2021 to now 2022. Yes, it's a great reference point. We should not ignore the data, but to validate it as a rally cry of why we should be happy with it, no, don't agree with that. The second article out of Hospitality Net, and I was just focusing on Hospitality Net because I like some of the articles that come up this week. One was for Hama. I've spoken at Hama before. uh, brilliant people that are part of it. But by the same token, not everybody knows all the answers. They had an article that popped up on hospitalitynet.org. By the way, these links are in our show notes, always able to get them. Um, Hospitality Asset Managers Association, HAMA, releases top five membership concerns for 2022. I won't say it's a duh moment, but I do enjoy the interesting ranking they have. Number one issue that they feel is availability of labor. Cannot agree more. Number two, which is going to be interesting that they identified it, but I think they're the least active organization or peoples from their position of authority in their organizations to do anything about this, even though they have the power to, and that is labor wage rates. They're worried about them. I think they're worried about them because the leverage that they used to have historically isn't the same leverage they have now. They're not in the driver's seat about what that cost of their operations is. They are now at the greater mercy of the people that they rely upon, and that they have to kind of cede to some of the demands that they would not normally cede to. The third item that they have is return of corporate travel. Sure, great to think of having it back, and then know it will come back in some form to shape. But if Bill Gates is right, even if he's half right, as Tim Peter refers to, that's still tens of billions of dollars of lost business. And a lot of the reasons why a lot of brick and mortar hotels are built is for literally that entity of travel. So yes, it's of great concern for the investment ownership groups. General inflation, yes, but we also know that it's a life cycle. That's just a kind of a chorus that they're doing. That yes, we're worried about inflation, sure, because the diminishment of value of what they have, which is money. So yes, inflation is a concern. Given how things are going, there is a cycle to it. There is a ups and then ebbs and the flows, and right now we're at the unfortunate growth of the impact of inflation. And the fifth, in general terms, which is kind of like a yeah, huh, market demand. What they're not used to, which we keep talking about on this show, is the diversification of the change of how we do business. We're not looking at national changes. We're looking at regional changes, regional demand changes, efforts and issues associated with it. And we saw that it wasn't just about the municipalities changing rules and guidelines to the pandemic. We saw tangible impacts that planes couldn't fly because there was no crews to fly them. We saw problems with there's no way to travel driving because the gas stations weren't getting the refills of gas because there's truckers that weren't driving, and products weren't getting shipped, and products weren't being made because people were not able to be there to do it. So there's a lot of this shifting as to how to interpret data in our method of being proactive in how we're seeing things. And this is why it's so critical that the three departments we talked about, marketing, revenue management, operations, truly collaborate in their understanding of what they are all responsible for, and that they truly keep a common vernacular in how they're handling the content of what they're doing, which is the key element to that. So those are the 5 points that were made out of the Hama group as to what they consider to be 2022 concerns. But like I said, all articles I refer to in here are available in our show notes. I welcome and solicit people's comment and feedback, which, by the way, last week was phenomenal. Like I said, I think we hit a nerve with a nerve, or at least a chord with people's perception of leadership and associations and their contributions and the value proposition of leadership versus conformity and so forth and so on. It was a great discussion. I enjoyed it. Apparently, you all did as well. I always thank everyone that joins us on all the platforms that we operate on: Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Also to Twitch. Thank you for folks there, which I do know I missed the live dialogue on Twitch, only because I can't do both at the same time and keeping up with the dialogue. So I go back on the dialogue that I see in there and try to respond to the comments that were made in there. And I thank everybody for having done that on that platform. For everyone else, if you don't just want to listen to me on your phone or watch me on the phone or on your computer, we are a TV channel. Hospitalitychannel.tv is the website. Also talktravel.tv. But if you go to your Roku or your Amazon Fire Stick TV, your YouTube TV, or actually say Google TV, excuse me, your Apple TV, look for the channel Hospitality Channel. Then, we add channels. Roku, just say look for Hospitality Channel. It's there, load it. The show that we do, this one is always free. It always shows up every week at 11:30 Friday. Plays. You can watch it. Plus, I keep some of the older ones for at least 3 weeks back on there, so you can go back and listen to them. But there's a lot of content that we're developing on the paid side, with like a Netflix. We went through the OTT discussion a few weeks back, so you understand the different categories of it. So we're on this that where there's going to be more content behind a payment gateway of $4.99 a month. We hope that you find it valuable to think that you're going to get more information beyond the live show's dialogue. I am soliciting. And if you're interested, please reach out to me at lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com for co-hosts to come join me. Either join me and or be the lead host on a show and bring your own people to discuss what you find valuable. The cool part is we don't do sponsorships. We don't do this as a monetization model. We do this for the benefit of content. And so we don't have to worry about upsetting a lot of people if you want to tell truth from your position. We won't be political and we won't make you do a sale. We don't want you to do sales pitch. We're not here for you to sell your product. We're not here to go over and have you talk about how well you do your product. If it applies to the validation of why you're able to talk about the content, great. That's as far as it goes. So if you're interested in coming on the show, by all means, reach out to me at lauren@hospitalitydigitalmarketing.com. I answer each and every email associated with the show and my live podcast, well, not live podcast, my podcast that I record after the show, which I recap the show, plus also really dive into some tools and the technique usage for them and so forth. People really, I thank you very much for your patronage on that as well. Listenership, I should say patronage means you pay, you don't pay. It's a free podcast on 39 platforms and counting. We're in 39 countries. We translate this to 11 languages. Thank you all very much. We also will recast this Wednesdays, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, Sydney time for our APAC friends, and 11:30 a.m. London time for our EU friends, because I know these come in odd hours for both of those or several of those time zones. So with that, I thank you for the privilege of your time. My name is Lauren Gray. Thank you for joining me this week. I hope you join me next week for show number 338, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time, US. And until then, have a great, safe, and healthy, productive week. And I look forward to talking to you then.
I wonder why this happened. this doesn't seem to be a fair way to treat a customer. And I'm just a piano player.
Right.
You know,